Mayim Bialik. Great to have you with us. So fun to see your success. And I mean, my goodness, you didn't just play a scientist in The Big Bang Theory. You are a scientist.
She turned down Harvard and Yale, earned a real neuroscience PhD, played a scientist on one of the biggest shows on television, then lost one of the most iconic hosting jobs in TV history, all while raising 2 kids on her own. But none of that is the part people are talking about right now. What she revealed in a personal essay earlier this year stopped people mid-scroll. Not because it was scandalous, but because nobody expected someone with her background, her credentials, her entire identity built around science to say what she said. This is the full story. When the science stopped working. In June of 2025, Mayim Bialik published a deeply personal essay in the Free Press, and it spread fast. In it, she described what happened after her doctors recommended she try a low-dose GLP-1 medication, the same class of weight loss and diabetes medications that had become one of the biggest medical conversations in the country. Given her history with Graves' disease, an autoimmune condition that affects the thyroid, her medical team felt it was worth exploring. She agreed. What followed was not what anyone expected, especially not her. She wrote about experiencing one of the worst physical reactions of her life: severe digestive distress, painful cramping, bloating, and an inability to keep down even small sips of water. She described days where she was essentially unable to function. For someone who had spent years studying the human body at an academic level and building a public identity around health and science-backed thinking, the experience hit differently. It wasn't just physically brutal, it shook something in her. But here's what made the essay actually travel. She wasn't writing it to scare people off the medication. She was careful to say that GLP-1 medications have genuinely helped a lot of people. What she was doing was pointing to a gap, a silence around the cases where things go wrong. She was saying that the conversation around these treatments had become so dominated by success stories that people who had adverse reactions felt invisible, and she clearly felt like one of them. For her audience, it landed. Because this wasn't some celebrity casually complaining about a trend. This was a neuroscientist, someone who had spent her whole life trusting the scientific process, saying, "The system doesn't always make room for the outliers." And I was one. The brain behind the persona. To understand why that essay hit the way it did, you have to go back further. Because Mayim Bialik was never a typical Hollywood story. She first appeared on national television at around 12 years old, and by the time she was a teenager, she was starring in her own show. Blossom ran from 1991 to 1995 and made her a recognizable face across America. But while other child stars at the time were leaning hard into the fame, the magazine covers, the party circuit, the brand deals, Mayim was doing something different. People on set would often find her between takes with her nose in a book, not a celebrity magazine, but actual academic material. She was curious in a way that didn't fit the mold. Her parents had raised her with a strong emphasis on education, and that foundation never loosened, even as Hollywood pulled at her. When she was 17, she received acceptance letters from both Harvard and Yale, the kind of news that most families would celebrate for months. She turned them both down, not because she wasn't serious about school, but because she wanted to stay in California, stay close to her family, and continue pursuing both tracks, science and acting, at the same time. She enrolled at UCLA instead. That decision alone said a lot about who she was. She wasn't choosing fame over education. She wasn't choosing education over her family. She was refusing to let anyone else define what her path had to look like. At UCLA, She didn't coast on her celebrity or treat the degree as a side project. She went all the way. In 2007, she completed her PhD in neuroscience. Her dissertation focused on hypothalamic activity in people with Prader-Willi syndrome, a complex genetic condition. This wasn't a vanity degree. This was serious, peer-reviewed, years in the lab academic work. And then, instead of going into research full-time, she walked back onto a television set. The role that changed everything, and the controversy it carried. When Mayim joined The Big Bang Theory in 2010 as Amy Farrah Fowler, there was an obvious irony in the casting. A real neuroscientist playing a neuroscientist on TV. The show leaned into it, and audiences loved it. She was nominated for 4 Emmy Awards for the role. For a stretch of years, she was one of the most recognizable women on American television. But visibility in Hollywood is a double-edged thing. The bigger her platform got, the more scrutiny followed every opinion she shared publicly. In 2012, she published a parenting book called Beyond the Sling, which laid out her approach to what's known as attachment parenting, a philosophy that includes practices like extended breastfeeding, co-sleeping, and baby wearing. The reaction was immediate and polarized. Supporters saw it as a thoughtful, research-grounded approach. Critics called it extreme, out of touch, and potentially harmful. The debate got loud and personal. Mayim didn't back down. She continued defending her views in interviews, on panels, and through her writing. But the pushback wasn't just about parenting techniques. It was also the beginning of a pattern. Anytime she spoke with conviction about something, a portion of the public would treat her expertise as arrogance. The same intelligence that made people respect her also made her a target when she stepped into contested territory. Then, her marriage ended. She and Michael Stone had been together for nearly a decade. Their divorce in 2013 became public news at a time when she was at the height of her visibility. She has spoken since about the toll of navigating that privately while filming, doing press, and raising 2 sons largely on her own. The exhaustion of that season, personal and professional at once, was something she didn't hide entirely, though she tried to control the narrative as best she could. What she couldn't fully control was how the public began assembling a version of her. Intense, opinionated, difficult. It wasn't entirely fair, but it was the image that was starting to calcify. The essay that nearly ended it all. 2017 is the year that genuinely changed the arc of her public life. When the Harvey Weinstein story broke and the #MeToo movement swept through Hollywood, Mayim did something that many public figures were doing in those weeks. She wrote about her own experience navigating the industry. Her op-ed ran in the New York Times, and her intention seemed sincere. She wrote about growing up in Hollywood as a girl who didn't fit the conventional beauty mold, about being largely overlooked by the kind of powerful men who preyed on young women, and about the personal choices she had made, how she dressed, how she carried herself, the spaces she avoided, that she believed had kept her off that radar. The response was swift and severe. Readers and commentators across social media and major publications argued that her framing suggested women who dressed differently or who moved in those high-profile spaces were somehow more responsible for what happened to them. The term used over and over was victim blaming. Her words, whatever she intended by them, were read as implying that behavior and appearance could serve as protection, and by extension, that those who were targeted had somehow not protected themselves well enough. It was the kind of controversy that doesn't resolve cleanly. She apologized. She clarified. She acknowledged that her words had caused real pain to people she had genuinely wanted to support. But the damage to her reputation in certain corners of the public was lasting. Articles from that period still surface whenever her name comes up. And for years afterward, she carried the weight of being associated with a position she insisted she never meant to take. What made it particularly bruising was the context. She had spent her whole life building credibility through education and careful thinking. And in one essay, written quickly, in the middle of one of the most emotionally charged cultural moments of the decade, that credibility took a hit it wouldn't fully recover from. The seat nobody could agree she deserved. By the time Jeopardy came calling in 2021, Mayim was in the middle of a complicated public rehabilitation. The pandemic had brought her podcast, Bialik's Breakdown, a real audience. She was opening up about mental health, therapy, and the science of emotional resilience, and people were responding. Things felt like they were shifting. Then the Jeopardy announcement happened. Alex Trebek had passed away in November of 2020. The show's producers spent months in an extended guest hosting audition process that became its own ongoing media story. Eventually, it was announced that Ken Jennings and Mayim Bialik would share hosting duties, Jennings on the syndicated version, Mayim on primetime specials and spin-offs. The reaction from longtime Jeopardy fans was not warm. A section of the audience had already decided before she filmed a single episode that she wasn't the right person for the role. Online petitions circulated. Comment sections filled up. Every episode she hosted was dissected. Her delivery, her timing, the way she moved through the contestants, what she wore. Comparisons to Jennings were constant and rarely flattering. Part of the criticism was probably fair. Live game show hosting is a specific skill, and Mayim had no background in it. She was learning in public, which is a brutal way to develop any craft. But a significant portion of the hostility felt like it was less about her performance and more about her history. The op-ed, the parenting controversy, the perception of her as someone who always had to be the smartest person in the room. She hosted through 2022 and into 2023. Then, the Writers Guild of America went on strike. When the WGA strike began in May of 2023, Mayim made the decision to stop hosting in solidarity with the writers. It was a principled stand. It also effectively handed her opponents at the production level a reason to move on. By the end of 2023, Sony confirmed that her hosting contract would not be renewed. Ken Jennings would take over as the sole permanent host. She lost the job, publicly, in a way that felt, to a lot of people watching, like a verdict on her entire second chapter in television. Building something that doesn't depend on anyone's approval. What happened after Jeopardy is, in some ways, the most interesting part of the whole story. She didn't rush to replace it. She had already launched Bialik's Breakdown in early 2021. And rather than treating it as a placeholder while she waited for the next TV opportunity, she leaned in. The podcast became something with its own identity. Conversations with psychologists, researchers, and people navigating mental health challenges, all filtered through her background in neuroscience. It wasn't a celebrity interview show. It had a specific intellectual texture to it, and it attracted a specific kind of listener. She also talked about her own struggles in a way she hadn't before. Episodes where she described her experience with depression, with the anxiety of being a single parent, with the long-term emotional residue of the op-ed fallout. Those were the ones that spread. People weren't just following her because of the Big Bang Theory anymore. They were following her because she was saying out loud the things that a lot of people felt but hadn't heard articulated that clearly. One area she returned to repeatedly was the relationship between chronic stress and physical health. Drawing on her neuroscience background, she explained to her audience how prolonged emotional pressure, the kind she had been living under for years, doesn't just affect mood. It rewires how the body responds to everything from sleep to digestion to immune function. For her listeners, this wasn't abstract science. It was a framework for understanding their own lives. And for Mayim, it was clearly a framework she was using to understand hers. In 2022, she stepped behind the camera for the first time as director on the film As They Made Us. It was a family drama, quiet, slow, emotionally heavy. The story of an adult daughter trying to hold her fractured family together while processing grief and estrangement. It was personal in ways that were obvious to anyone paying attention. Critics noted the honesty of the storytelling. It didn't clean things up at the end. The film didn't become a blockbuster, but it confirmed something that her supporters had been saying for a while. She had creative instincts that went beyond performing other people's words. What also became clear during this period was that she was deliberately building something decentralized. A career that didn't live or die on one network's decision, one producer's approval, or one show's ratings. The podcast was hers. The film was hers. The essays were hers. After years of having her livelihood tied to other people's platforms, that independence wasn't incidental. It was the whole point. And then came the GLP-1 essay in 2025, which, in retrospect, fits perfectly into the through line. She has spent the last several years building a version of her public voice that is specifically about saying the quiet part out loud. The health experiences that don't go well, the parenting choices that get judged, the career losses that don't come with a clean, redemptive ending. The essay wasn't a departure. It was the clearest expression yet of the public figure she has been actively becoming. What the transformation actually looks like up close. Here's the thing about Mayim Bialik's story that tends to get lost in the individual controversies. Every single setback she has experienced has come directly from the same source as her credibility. Her willingness to say exactly what she thinks in exactly the way she thinks it, without softening it for the room. The parenting book. That was her genuine philosophy, not a calculated brand play. The New York Times essay, she wrote it because she believed she had something valuable to contribute to that conversation. The decision to walk away from Jeopardy during the strike, she has said she couldn't in good conscience cross that line, regardless of the career cost. These decisions have cost her real money, real opportunities, real reputation. But they have also built something that most celebrities who play it safe never accumulate. A genuinely loyal audience that trusts her. Not because she is always right, but because she is consistently honest about her thinking. When she gets something wrong, she says so. When something in her own life contradicts the image, she puts it on the table. The GLP-1 essay is a perfect example. She is a scientist who, by her own account, trusted a medical intervention that made her severely ill. She could have kept that private. Instead, she wrote about it publicly and specifically, not to generate sympathy or go viral, but because she thought the gap in the conversation was worth filling. And the response confirmed something important. People are hungry for that kind of honesty, especially from someone with actual scientific literacy who isn't trying to sell them anything. There is also something worth noting about the timing of her reinvention. She didn't start over in her 20s with nothing to lose. She rebuilt in her 40s with a public record of controversies that anyone could pull up in 30 seconds. That is a different kind of courage. Restarting when you are young and unknown is a risk. Restarting when the whole internet remembers your worst moments is something else entirely. She has also been open about the role therapy played in getting her there. Not in a vague, inspirational way, but specifically talking about the kind of cognitive work involved in separating her self-worth from public reception, something she had clearly struggled with for years. For someone whose identity had been so tightly tied to being seen as intelligent and credible, having that perception publicly damaged was not a minor thing to recover from. Whether you agree with her on any particular issue or not, that's a coherent identity. She has figured out who she is and what she wants her platform to be. That took her roughly 3 decades, a divorce, a public scandal, a failed high-profile job, and a medical ordeal to arrive at. But she got there. At 49, she is not trying to be Amy Farrah Fowler. She is not trying to be the next Alex Trebek. She is writing essays that make people stop scrolling. She is directing films about families that don't heal neatly. She is hosting conversations about the parts of mental health that TV won't touch. This is a transformation that no one would have expected. But when you finally see it, you can't unsee it. Now, it's time to hear from you. If Mayim Bialik had played it safe at every turn, stayed quiet in the trailer, taken the Ivy League path, smiled through Jeopardy, would anyone still be talking about her today? Or would she have quietly faded into the background like some other people have? What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. For more interesting stories like this, be sure to click on the next video that pops up on your screen. You never know what you'll discover next.